A new study in the journal Nature Climate Change finds that incidence of extreme fire weather are increasing, driven by falling humidity and rising temperatures. And that's caused by climate change. So I'm going to be talking to Natural Resource Canada's Dr. Piyush Jain, the lead author of the study. So welcome to the interview, Dr. Jain.
Hi, Markham.
So look, let's start with an overview of the study, please.
Well, so we decided to look at extreme fire weather and how it's changing over time. So the reason we chose to look particularly extreme fire weather is that it's kind of well known in the science community that it's just 3% of fires are responsible for 97% of the area burned. And quite often that happens under the most extreme fire weather conditions. So there's really large fires that burn when it's very hot, dry, and windy. So we have several different metrics or scales that we can use to measure that. And so we looked at how those quantities were changing over the last 42 years or so. And we found positive increases, well, positive trends, I should say, and increases over like a quarter to half of the Earth's burnable surface, which means that the areas that have forest or shrubs or grasslands that can burn.
So the fact that this is linked to decreasing humidity and rising temperatures, and this is a global study, where does the data come from for a study of this, with this reach?
Well, that was one of the reasons for doing the study, actually, is that as a European data set called, it's called a reanalysis is the type of data that it is. And what it does is it combines models and observations, and it gives you the best estimate of historical weather that you can get, basically. And it's complete across space and time. So one of these data sets became available 2 or 3 years ago, and we decided to update some of the previous studies using this new data.
So is the takeaway here that the severity and intensity of wildfires is increasing and will increase over time? Now we seem to have reached some kind of a tipping point, at least it feels that way, living in British Columbia with all of the heat we had in the summer and the recent atmospheric river storms we've had in the lower mainland and the interior. So is that a fair takeaway from your study?
Well, there's a couple of points I'd want to make there. One is, for sure, BC is seeing increasing fire activity and increasing extreme fire weather, which is what we found in our study. That was one of the areas of Canada that had a very pronounced signal of increasing extreme fire weather. In fact, 2017, 2018, and 2021 now, the three biggest fire seasons in British Columbia are on record. So for sure, there are increases in fire activity, which go along with increases in extreme fire weather. However, more generally, sort of a caveat, I guess, to this sort of work is that fire weather is only one factor in fires. Of course, there's a bunch of other factors which are important, like the source of ignitions, lightning, for example, land use changes, fire management, all sorts of things can go into determining the amount of fire that ultimately you see on the landscape.
So if I understand this correctly, the change in the climate change is continuing the trends of lowering humidity and increasing temperature. So that leads to the conditions more conducive to the more extreme fire weather. But then that's perhaps mitigated by the other variables that you talked about?
Well, in some cases, perhaps mitigated. In other cases, perhaps not so much, depending on the particular region of the world and how they manage fires and the way they use the land and so forth. So we are seeing that, in different parts of the world, not to get too much into it, but, like deforestation can actually, even though you are removing fuels, you're also changing the climate by doing that, and you can actually increase fire danger. So
what's the big takeaway from this, Dr. Jain? What if you were talking to policymakers around the world, what would be your advice based on this study?
Well, I would say there's a clear link between climate change, between the warming climate and increasing extreme fire weather. And now we know where that's happening on a global scale. And so we need to monitor these areas, and we need to be prepared. Communities need to prepare for all eventualities with extreme wildfire events in those regions where there are fuels that can burn, and where we've identified that there's extreme fire weather and increasing trends.
Is there a limit, excuse me, is there a limit to what humans can do to mitigate the threat? It seems, I mean, I watch what happens in British Columbia, and yes, you know, there usually is, the government can slow it down, it can make it reduce the severity, but it never seems to be able to eliminate it or change its mitigation policy, like managing the fuel in the forest, that sort of thing. It seems like severe wildfires is simply going to be part of our future going forward until the issue of climate change is dealt with. Is that a fair comment?
Well, yeah, you know, I'm not an expert on fire management. It's not my area. But certainly what I can say is that fires will continue to burn under increasingly severe weather. And when you have a fire which is large or which spreads under extreme fire weather conditions, it's very difficult to contain. There's not much you can do. You just have to stand back, monitor it, or do the best you can to control a flank of the fire or to protect communities. We're seeing a lot increasing evacuations in Canada, for example. So yeah, there are going to be effects of fires that burn under extreme fire weather and increasing extreme fire weather.
Are there other regions of North America, for instance, that are experiencing extreme fire weather? And I mean, we can think of California, which would be an obvious one. But what about in the eastern parts of the continent? Should we expect more extreme fire weather in those areas?
We found in our study most of the increases in extreme fire weather were on the west, actually. There weren't, there were very isolated increases on the east of the continent. So we can expect, you know, this is over the last 40 years. So it's hard to predict what's going to happen going forward. If you have increasing temperature and decreasing humidity in the east, I mean, one can expect fire weather to also worsen in the east. So, but that's not what our particular study showed. It showed what has already happened historically.
Great. Well, Dr. Jain, thank you very much for these insights. Really appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Great to talk to you, Markham.